Okay, so in this topic we're going to be answering the question, to what extent are humans the cause of and solution to climate change? You might generally know this topic on its own just as climate change. So, first of all, what is climate? Climate are the average weather conditions, and it usually includes rainfall and precipitation measured over a long period of time. So it's what you would expect the weather to be like. If we take a look at this climate graph for Birmingham, you can see that the bars represent precipitation or rainfall. And if we look to the right of the graph, you can see it's measured in millimetres or inches. So that would indicate that it's the depth of the water. The line, however, represents temperature, okay? And in the UK, we measure temperature in degrees Celsius, and that is on the left and y-axis of this graph. So, climate change in the Quaternary period. The Quaternary period is basically the last 2.6 million years, and the climate of the world has changed due to climate change more generally, natural feature of the Earth's atmosphere changing. Also, it has changed due to human actions, and we tend to call this global warming. If we look at this graph, we can see that we have got years along the x-axis, and the y-axis we have got the deviation from the average temperature between 1901 and 2000. In simplistic terms, when this line is above the zero, the temperature of the Earth is getting warmer. And as you can see, since the Industrial Revolution, especially since 1960 to the present day, global temperatures have been rising significantly. Causes of global warming are often linked to the greenhouse effect. So if you imagine a greenhouse in your garden where you grow your tomatoes, sunlight, solar energy comes in, it can't escape, nice warm atmosphere for your plants to thrive. However, on a global scale, humans releasing more CO2 due to the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, carbon sink trees, they've been cut down, the CO2 is being released into the atmosphere, plus there's cattle farming, which releases methane, means there's a thicker layer of these greenhouse gases around the Earth. And like your greenhouse, the solar energy comes in, but it can't escape, global temperatures rise. What is the historic evidence for climate change? One way we can look at the historic evidence is by using ice core analysis. You could go to places such as Alaska, Svalbard, the North Pole, Antarctica, and use a huge drill that goes into the ice and takes out an ice core that looks like this. Now, scientists can measure the amount of water molecules in the ice core from certain periods to decide and find out how global temperatures were at a particular point in time. Current evidence for climate change: ice thinning. So everybody knows ice caps are melting, and since 1975 the depth of the ice caps has actually shrunk by 65%, so over half. And if we look at this inverted graph, we can basically see that ice is getting thinner and thinner. The IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also says that there's been a 10 to 20 millimetre rise in sea levels in the past 100 years, generally due to ice caps melting and thermal expansion. When water's warmer, it gets deeper. Another current example is birds are nesting 9 days earlier. So they think it's time to start having babies a little bit earlier because the temperature is warmer than it used to be. Another example we can use is tree rings. Tree rings represent the growing period, and as time has gone on, tree rings are getting deeper and thicker, and this says that there's more time for growing, which generally means the warmer growing period is longer. What are the effects of climate change? One effect of climate change is ice caps melting that we've already discussed. The ice caps and glaciers are melting, going into the sea, causing sea levels to rise, and we believe that by 2100 global sea levels will rise by about 1 metre. This is especially devastating for low-lying places. For example, the Maldives in the Indian Ocean are under huge threat from climate change.
As a result of sea level rise in Vietnam, we're going to see a lot of social, economic and environmental challenges. So in this map here, which shows the percentage of land that's damaged as a result of sea level rise, we can see that some areas are going to be 100% flooded or damaged. That's going to lead to a lot of social and environmental challenges. For example, it's going to make a lot of people homeless, but that will also have massive economic challenges as well. You can see lots of areas, particularly those that are going to be have higher levels of flooding, will experience millions of dollars of economic challenges or damage. So the causes of climate change, we split them usually into the natural causes and the human causes. The natural causes that have been happening for 2.6 billion years throughout the Quaternary period. One of them, orbital changes or changes in the way, the shape of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. We've split them into three: eccentricity, precession and axial tilt. But essentially, eccentricity, sometimes our orbit is a bit more circular, sometimes it's a little bit more egg-shaped. That varies about every 100,000 years. Well, when the Earth is orbiting slightly close to the Sun, we're going to have a warmer climate, whereas if it's slightly further away, we're going to have a colder one. Solar activity, sunspots, these determine how much insolation or incoming radiation from the Sun the Earth gets. If there are more sunspots, we're going to get more radiation. We're going to have a warmer climate. If there are fewer sunspots, then we're going to have a cooler climate. And finally, volcanic activity. When a volcano erupts, it releases volcanic ash into the atmosphere. Think of that ash as like little mirrors. They reflect incoming sunlight or insolation, and they cool the Earth down, sometimes called a volcanic winter. But there are also human causes of climate change, and these are the ones that are driving the recent increase in global temperatures or global warming. One of the biggest ones is the fact that we emit 7,000 million cubic tons of carbon dioxide from industry. So including the Industrial Revolution and increased manufacturing in NEEs around the world, a lot of carbon dioxide is produced by industry. There are also 1.4 billion cars on the planet with an internal combustion engine that is burning fossil fuels like diesel or petrol, and again releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We've also got the fact that about one football pitch or 1 hectare of rainforest or forest is cut down every second in the world. So trees being cut down, trees are a carbon sink. So they store carbon in vast amounts, but if they're cut down, that carbon gets released into the atmosphere and adds to the greenhouse effect. So we can take the example of the Amazon rainforest, where we can see that pretty much every corner of the Amazon rainforest has seen deforestation, and as a result, all the carbon that was once stored in those trees is now inside the Earth's atmosphere. There are also 1 billion cattle. Many of those cattle are in South America, where land has to be deforested in order to provide grazing for those cattle. So that's going to cause climate change and global warming. We've also got the fact that ruminant animals, by belching, essentially burping or farting, release methane, which is also a very powerful greenhouse gas. All of that combines, all of those human causes combine to enhance the greenhouse effect. So the Earth has a natural greenhouse effect. It's why it's quite warm and it can sustain life. But all this extra carbon dioxide and methane that we as humans are putting into the atmosphere using the activities that we've just mentioned makes that blanket, that layer, much thicker. And if that layer is much thicker, more heat is going to be trapped inside the Earth's atmosphere, and our climate is going to warm. So how can we respond to climate change? There's two ways. The first way is mitigation. By mitigation, we mean stopping climate change or reducing the root cause. Now, we know the root cause of climate change is greenhouse gases, so pretty much every single mitigation strategy is designed to stop putting those greenhouse gases or remove those greenhouse gases from the Earth's atmosphere. Adaptation, slightly more drastic, but this is adapting to cope with the effects of climate change. It's not going to stop climate change, but it will help people maintain their standard of living and quality of life despite the effects of climate change. So, how do we mitigate climate change? How do we stop greenhouse gases being in the atmosphere? The first one is alternative energy sources. So in the UK, we are moving towards the majority of our electricity or our energy mix being produced through wind turbines. The reason, we're the windiest nation in Europe, whereas countries such as Portugal, which have a different kind of energy, they have a lot of incoming solar radiation, might utilise or invest in solar farms, for example. We can also use carbon capture, which is a very expensive but very effective method of climate change mitigation, where a facility such as the Orca facility in Iceland captures carbon from the atmosphere and sequesters, or basically shoot it down into the ground where it becomes rock. The main thing is that carbon dioxide is being stored in the ground as opposed to being in the atmosphere and making that blanket thicker and increasing heating. Afforestation, or planting trees, a very, very simple and cheap technology for mitigating climate change. Planting trees through photosynthesis take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So that is actually going to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. An example of afforestation, so the Great Green Wall in Africa, is a plan to stop the advancing effects of desertification of climate change, but also as afforestation to mitigate and reduce the effects of climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide, is to build a wall of trees from West Africa all the way across to Djibouti in East Africa that will intake or absorb millions of tons of carbon dioxide every year. Another way of mitigating climate change is international agreement. So the most recent example is the Paris Climate Agreement, which was ratified by 194 countries in 2015, where they agreed or committed to take action to keep global warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But in terms of adaptation, how can we cope with the effects of climate change in order to preserve standard of living and quality of life? And LIC, the Gambia in West Africa, they're using new irrigation systems to more efficiently use water so that it doesn't run out due to drought. But also afforestation, the shade that trees provide can help seedlings to grow better, so that improves food security for people in the Gambia. But Vietnam, we saw the rising sea levels in the effects section of this video, so now I'll have a look at how they are adapting their lives in Vietnam. One simple method is they're building their houses on stilts to cope with that sea level rise, so people can still live and work and get an education despite the rising sea level. Another way in Vietnam is the planting of mangrove forests. So mangrove forests as a plant are a massive carbon sink, but they also act as a method of soft engineering to protect against erosion and flooding from rising sea levels. We can also use hard engineering as well. So this is in Europe, where a seawall has been built, again to prevent flooding and erosion of the coastline as a result of climate change. In the Maldives, which is really important for tourism is massive for their economy, they have also carried out some soft and hard engineering. So you can see we've got some groins here, which are going to prevent longshore drift from the stronger waves as a result of climate change. And we've also got some appropriate technology, some sandbags, which are very simple, cheap and easy to use, but protect the important tourist hotspots from flooding and erosion. So your homework, you've got a choice of 3 tasks. You can either research what governments around the world have agreed to do in order to reduce the rate of climate change and the potential impacts. Have a look at the Paris Climate Agreement if you're not sure. Imagine you live in Vietnam, complete a geography matrix, so think about how climate change is going to affect society, social, economic and environmental challenges that people face in Vietnam. And finally, create a revision poster that includes everything from this video. This video might be a good place to start. So the causes of climate change, the effects of climate change, and finally how we can manage or mitigate climate change.